Welcome to GraceLife Church. I'm David Kinneberg, one of the teaching elders here at GraceLife. We want to thank you for joining us online and listening to our sermons online. Hope they are a blessing and encouragement to you. If you want more information, you can check out our website at glcanoka.org. Thanks and God bless. Roger alluded to the fact that we're going to take a detour out of the book of Revelation today. We'll finish Revelation chapter 12 next week. But there's a item that's out in our society and is very prominent right now, and it's called critical race theory. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, bad company corrupts good morals. In the context of that passage, it's talking about people that were teaching false doctrines. And 1 Corinthians 33 is basically saying bad ideas have bad consequences. Ideas have consequences. Let me give you an example. 1 Corinthians 15:33. Bad ideas have bad consequences. An example would be in 1940s Germany, there were 7 million people that died at the hands of the Nazi Germany. That was a consequence of ideas. What is interesting, and part of it is because there is more people than the 7 million in Germany that died. There was approximately 68 more million people that died as the result of World War II. But what is interesting is he actually paled, Adolf Hitler actually paled in comparison to other people with bad ideas. Stalin, 20 million people died at the hands of Stalin. We sort of forget that. Maybe not us, but a lot of people do. 20 million people dead because of a bad idea. By the way, some of it was gruesome, from torture to starvation. Very bad idea. He pales in comparison to Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong made Adolf Hitler, Stalin look like amateurs. 45 million people dying at the hands of Mao Zedong. In Cambodia, much smaller number, but by percentage, huge. In fact, it's referred to as the killing fields, but 1.8 million Cambodians died at the hands of Pol Pot. 25% of that country dying because of a bad idea. Frankly, and this is important to note, all of those ideas come from the same font head. They're totalitarian on purpose. They're totalitarian because they come from the same stream of philosophy and thinking. Now, with that being said, that's an example of bad ideas having bad consequences. And there's a warning here, and that is because when we see a bad idea, we need to focus on it, understand it, and confront it immediately. Critical race theory. The reason why I'm preaching this is somehow it came up in conversation, and someone near and dear to me said, "What is critical race theory?" And began explaining it. When I say, "What is critical race theory?" we hear it, and boy, it's what's going on with it. Let me give you a little history with it. First of all, critical race theory comes out of something called critical theory. Well, that sounds like logical sense. In the 1930s, there was a group of people in Frankfurt, Germany, that began looking at Marxism. One of the problems with Marxism, by the way, is it doesn't work in the places it's supposed to work. They never expected Russia to be the place that communism would take hold. It wasn't their ideal place. But Marxism requires diversity. Marxism requires differences. It requires the oppressed and the oppressor. It requires somebody that has wealth, and this is where Karl Marx was limited in his imagination. It requires someone that has a lot of stuff and somebody that doesn't have a lot of stuff, and those two to get in a fight. And frankly, communism always requires bloodshed. I'll even use another word because Karl Marx used it. Socialism always requires bloodshed. It goes hand in hand. They work together. They are required. But critical theory began looking at, okay, economics is just not enough to drive socialism/communism. It's not going to work. We need to begin to apply it to other aspects of society. And that's where critical theory began looking at cultural cracks in which you could find an oppressor and the oppressed. And therefore, you could have that Marxism and you could foster Marxism in those societies. Without going too far afield here, that has happened in religious circles. In South America, liberation theology was, they looked at it, there's no way you could establish atheistic communism in South America, so you needed to couch it in religious terms. And liberation theology came in there. Black liberation theology, they looked in the United States. The best way to enter the United States was through, in the black community, through the theology there. All those things are Marxist. And one of the key things with Marxism is it is atheistic. It throws out God, and it has a different agenda for the world than what God would have. So that is critical theory. Critical race theory, we'll fast forward from 1930s to 1980. There is a group of lawyers that were looking at society, and they began applying critical theory to race. And basically, critical race theory, critical race theory, and I'll summarize it. And it sounds, there's part of this that sounds like it's on point, but I'll point out the fact that where they go with it is wrong. One of the things they realize, and we'll give them a point for this, is that there is no such thing as race. Okay? That's a good thing to understand. The problem is, when you don't have a biblical viewpoint to look at it, it takes you in a wrong direction. There's one human race. Okay? Doesn't matter what your skin tone is, doesn't matter where you were born, doesn't matter where you come from, there's one human race. And without going through the biology of that, it's something very easy for us as believers to understand. What they did come to the conclusion then is race is an ideology, a thinking process is what they figured out. That's what their stated understanding was, that it's something that is designed or manufactured. There will be one other point that is very poignant to understand about critical race theory. By the way, race, the idea of race, comes from an atheistic, materialistic viewpoint. Anybody help me? Who was the person that came up with the idea of races? Bingo. Origin of Species. If you want to read the Origin of Species, waste your time, go and do that, because the logic goes this way. If we all evolved and there's all these changes going on, there's going to be differences. Some people are going to be more evolved than other people. You know, obviously, Darwin didn't go and say, well, there's some other people more evolved than me. It was the other way around. Well, I'm more evolved than other people. That's where racism came in. In fact, that was highly applied in our country. Eugenics, if you've ever heard of that, that's a Darwinian thought. And Margaret Sanger, Planned Parenthood. The Planned Parenthood, by the way, was for the whole purpose of eradicating the black population in the United States. And it's part of that philosophy and thinking, apart from God. Now, critical race theory realizes, hey, race isn't a thing. As an idea, we're all humanity. What is ironic is, even though they understand that, they begin doing very racist type of thinking. And that's something that you can explore. A second thing that they come to a conclusion of, and you'll run across things like the 1619 Project, things like that go to that, is they have the idea, because race is ideology or a way of thinking, that the United States was founded and their laws across the board were racist in their origins. So the only way that we can take care of any racial divisions is to destroy the whole foundation. Basically, we need to knock it down to the foundations and rebuild it entirely. Frankly, if you understand Marxism, you can understand that as stating Marxism to the pure core. That's what Marxists do. They destroy societies and they rebuild them the way they want to. Now, that's a very brief synopsis of critical race theory. There's a lot of things and a lot of various interpretations of critical race theory. And that's a very basic summarization of critical race theory. And there will be opportunities, you can have opportunities on your own to search that out. But I want to give 10 biblical responses to critical race theory. Now, obviously, I'm not going to spend 5-6 minutes with each one of these because we'd be here rather long. And you might say, oh, I'm starting to get hungry, I'll come back to the later part of it here. But there's 10 biblical responses that I want to have to this critical race theory. And we'll dive right into them. First of all, critical race theory is Marxist, and I've talked about that point. But because it's Marxist, it is therefore materialistic in its foundation. Materialistic. Again, I mentioned this before. Most of the time when we think of materialism, we think of covetousness. Oh, someone's materialistic. They want a lot of stuff. Genuine materialism is a faith and dependence upon the material. Marxism does not believe in a creator. Everything just happened. We evolved, we bubbled up from a bunch of stew, and therefore we are just material. And I'm going to use a number of verses as we go through each one of these, not because they're necessarily the best verse to speak to this, but because they're probably the most succinct to respond to it. And there's multiple verses that we could respond to each one of these points. And frankly, we could probably go through weeks and weeks of responding to critical race theory biblically. But I want to be quick and concise with some of these points. In Mark chapter 8 and verse 36, it says, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul?" By the way, something that we miss here in this verse is some of the cleverness that is going on in the Scripture. Most of the time we think of soul, somebody has their soulless. I joked when I'm going to get in trouble here. Hannah, the same day her engine blew up on her car, my Ford Focus, it died. So I said, I lost my Focus, and Hannah lost her soul. But I'm going to get in real trouble. She is a ginger, so that's an impossibility. I'm sorry. Inappropriate. Anyway, we think of soul as being something ethereal, untouchable. We think of it much the way we think of a spirit. The Bible term of soul here is talking about the whole man. It's really a reference to both the immaterial and the material. That's the soul aspect. That's the way the Bible, when you're running across the word soul, is talking about material and immaterial, the complete man. If you could have everything that you would ever want or desire, yet you lose everything of you, it's worthless. And this is contrary to the idea that those that come from our Marxist viewpoint look at it, if we just distributed the resources properly, everything would be okay. We would be in good shape. That is not the case. We have more stuff than ever before. I remember growing up in the 80s. I know this is western Montana. In any given time, there was probably a dozen guns and shotguns, and the high school I went to was as big as any in the metro. In the school, in the metal shop, in the wood shop, getting the stocks redone. You could go out in the parking lot, there would be guns in the gun rack because they just got through hunting, and there was no school shootings. I think our country has more physical things and materialism now than back then. We could spend more time on that, but it's materialistic. It doesn't take into account the spiritual side of mankind, and therefore is going to have some bad consequences. Number 2, critical theory negates biblical justice. If you want to turn to Ezekiel, and Ezekiel chapter 18 is a good read if you want to understand justice. Social justice is a terminology that is associated with critical race theory. And it sounds like a good idea. Anybody here not want justice? I'm not raising my hand for not wanting justice. Okay. We all want justice. That's an important thing. But critical race theory does not promote biblical justice. Let me read here verse 20, and this is in the context of the whole passage. It's worth reading. It says here, the soul who sinned shall die. The Son shall not suffer for the iniquity of the Father, nor the Father suffer for the iniquity of the Son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon him, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon himself. Critical race theory tends to lump people into groups. You may not be a racist, but because you're of a particular group, you're guilty. That is dangerous and is contrary to biblical justice. The term social justice, when you hear it, understand it is not biblical justice. And it will not result in biblical justice if it's applied. Frankly, this is the idea behind the difference between being equal and equality in the idea of outcomes. If the outcomes are different, then that's not social justice. It may be very well social justice. It very may well be just to have unequal outcomes. That's part of life. We should want justice. We should want everyone to experience the same freedoms. That should be an ultimate goal in our country. But social justice does not point to that. It looks at rights for groups. Group rights. By the way, if group rights are what rights are about, there is no individual rights. That is why Adolf Hitler, that's why Stalin, that's why Mao Zedong, that's why Pol Pot could slaughter people by the millions, and it's okay because it helps society in their warped and perverted viewpoints. Social justice is not biblical justice, and it's contrary to it. It negates biblical justice. Critical race theory encourages blame shifting. I'll just explain the story here. Genesis 3:8. If you remember the circumstance after Adam and Eve sin, God comes to them. And what happens? God says, "Why did you eat of the fruit?" And Adam goes, the woman you gave me, that's why I did it. Of course, what did Eve do? Satan made me do it. Okay? She pulled the original Flip Wilson. Okay? Blame shifting. By the way, the reality of it is Adam wasn't lying, nor was Eve. God gave Adam Eve, and Eve gave him the fruit. But Adam was responsible for his own behavior. By the way, as we look at these things, one reason why I'm looking at these responses to it is because we can apply it into our everyday life. We can't all crusade against critical race theory every day in every way, but we can deal with these things and apply them in our own life. By the way, that's when something bad happens. We're all guilty of this, and some of us have a greater propensity to it. Don't tell Muffy I said this, but sometimes her response is, okay, Dave, how is this my fault that this happened? We do like to blame shift. The problem with critical race theory is it encourages that and it promotes it in our society. And frankly, it's detrimental. If you shift blame to someone else, you never take responsibility for the things that you can change and control. Blame shifting is a dangerous habit to get a hold of, and critical race theory encourages it. Number 4, critical race theory encourages bitterness. Hebrews 12:15. Beware lest a root of bitterness spring up in you, and many are defiled. It encourages bitterness. You know, when you focus, the reality is there's not a country that is on the face of the earth that does not have black and bloody stains all over it. Some of them, that's all they have. If we look at the history of the United States, is there things that we go, hey, that was not good in the least? In fact, that was downright evil. We could look at that. Do you know why that can happen? The same reason why I can say every one of you are sinners. Because I'm a sinner, all of us are sinners. Every nation is filled full of people. Where there are people, there are sinners. Where there are sinners, there are sins. That's a reality. But critical race theory encourages bitterness, looking back and dwelling on evil and focusing on that. It encourages people to be bitter. And it's interesting, the results of bitterness is always the same. And this is encouragement for you. If you focus on past wrongs that have happened to you, guess what? You're going to be bitter, and you're going to do things that are sinful. Part of bitterness ends up being a justification for doing evil. Well, somebody did this to me, I can do this to them. Critical race theory encourages bitterness. Critical race theory encourages hate. And by the way, again, some people say, no, this isn't what we're talking about. This isn't our goal with it. Well, it ends up being the case. Let me give you an illustration with this, by the way. If you're at the house and you have a 4-year-old in your house, and you say, okay, I fixed some cookies this morning, I put them in the cookie jar. After supper, you can have a cookie. Oh, yeah, exciting. Favorite cookie? I would say oatmeal raisin cookies, but my wife would hate those. Delicious, sustain you, keep you going. Let's say there's some chocolate chip cookies. Or better yet, ginger snap cookies with the kiss in the middle of them. You know, the Hershey's Kiss, best stuff. Manna, that's what manna tastes like. And you put it in the cookie jar. And you're off doing something, and you hear the chair in the kitchen go sliding across the floor. And you go, oh, so you walk into the kitchen. As you walk in the kitchen, you see the 4-year-old doing this. And you go, what are you doing? And the 4-year-old responds, I'm simply checking out how the ratio of the cookies to the size of the jar affects how well they fit in there and making sure none of them are crumbled. Because that's exactly what a 4-year-old would say. When people start going, and this is what is happening with critical race theory, when people are called out for saying there's some bad things with it, they backtrack and they say, oh, we're not saying this. They deny some of the negative consequences and some of the blatantly wrong and evil things that are being promoted by it. It encourages hate. Let me read just, and you could look at Mark 12:31, but Romans 13:10. Love does no wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. Critical race theory encourages hate because it encourages people to be looked at not as individuals, but as groups, and therefore as people that can be responsible for crimes that they haven't committed. In fact, this is one of the things that You know, the encouraging thing with response is seeing people that are black fellow Americans calling out the garbage on this. I mentioned this before. Growing up, I never thought I would ever see segregation being promoted in this country again. This will be a point that I want to speak to. But it's being promoted again. It's being encouraged. You can hear people that are, I've watched a lot and I've studied a lot on this. There's people that will say, I just cannot stand seeing white people. That's not healthy for our country. I don't care why you hate someone. God says, no, don't do it. And if you can justify hate for whatever reason for your philosophy, then you need to change your philosophy. Staying right in Romans here, Romans 12 and verse 9. Critical race theory seeks to remove what is good. Romans 12 and verse 9, let love be genuine. Let it be real. Abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good. Critical theory, race theory, looks at our country, and there's been some bad things that have happened. Like I said, Jim Crow, the Dred Scott is probably better, right? There's been things that have been wrong. Something I want you to think about, though. If our country was genuinely founded to be racist and horrible and need the foundation razed to the ground, would the South have needed to have Jim Crow laws? Right there bespeaks the fact that they had to enact and put things in place in order to create racism in the antebellum, or not antebellum, but the post-Civil War South. You know, destroying what has been founded as good in our country is two things about it. One, it's been the freest country ever established on the face of the earth. And number two, it has exported more freedom than any other country on the face of the earth. Critical race theory attacks that and seeks to remove what is good. Should we look if there's laws that are unjust? Yes, they need to be changed. If someone is being hurt or harmed unjustly by law, it needs to be changed. But critical race theory throws everything out. As the saying goes, the baby with the bathwater. Critical race theory does not recognize God's image. We could turn to Genesis 1:26, where it talks about Adam and Eve being created in God's image. Again, this goes to the very source of why they go overboard and wrong. When you understand there is one human race, that's a great place for you to be. But it takes the next understanding to remember that every individual is created in God's image. That is something that we should, by the way, keep forefront in our mind. Sometimes there's someone, might walk across, I hope not walk across, but encounter that I go, they're a little odd. And remembering that God created them in His image. They're image bearers. And there's a respect that is afforded to everyone that is an image bearer. Critical race theory doesn't do that. It allows for and even promotes despising people based on their position in society, based on their skin tone. Frankly, it does exactly the opposite of the direction we should be going in our country. Critical race theory reinstitutes segregation. Turn to Galatians chapter 3 and verse 28. One reason why there's different skin tones and different languages is because after the flood, mankind was going to get together and they were going to show God who was boss, and God scattered us. But something that has happened since the Tower of Babel is Jesus Christ has come. and He has died on the cross. And now we have the gospel. And something that is great about the gospel is in all the different areas that mankind has an impact of redemption, one of those things can happen is in the differences between ethnicity and backgrounds and cultures. God goes beyond that. In fact, look at Galatians chapter 3 and verse 28. It says, and this is talking about in Christ, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is no male or female. You are all in one in Christ Jesus. One of the great and powerful things, and frankly, in the millennial kingdom, God's not going to go, okay, we're going to separate you out in little groups and we're going to have you all different. The gospel bridges that gap. Part of it is not only are we reflecting on God's image that we all bear, but we're reflecting Jesus Christ's image. And critical race theory actually ends up resegmenting and resegregating our society. That is an application that is out there of this poorly devised theory. Critical race theory also falsely categorizes logic as being white. You could look at Isaiah 1:18 through 20, where it says, "Come, let us reason together." John chapter 1 talks about Jesus Christ being Logos, the Word. One of the things that has happened, and I would love to spend a half an hour explaining Hegelian philosophy. Hegel is really the progenitor of what ended up being fascism, socialism, communism. There's Fabianism that you want to throw in there. All these things sprang up from someone that came up with the Hegelian dialectic. Because Hegel did not believe there is any right or wrong. There's no black and white. It's just all gray. And so there's always going to be this change and progress in our society. And how we do it is you take a position, I take a position, and we sort of meet in the middle. And then you'll notice one thing that's happened in our society, and critical race theory plays into this, is here's where our society was. Somebody is over here, and they go, well, let's meet in the middle. So, okay, we'll sacrifice, we'll compromise, we're right here. Then when you look over, instead of being side by side with the person you compromise with, I'm going to mess up the camera here. They're over here. See, let's just compromise. Come on over here. That's how our society keeps getting pulled in a direction that is entirely unbiblical. Critical race theory subscribes to the attitude, and it does not believe in, it does not purport, it would not hold to what we traditionally understand as reason and logic. Because things, 2 plus 2, by the way, this is, when you hear about things such as group theory being taught in school where 2 plus 2 doesn't always equal 4, there's a reason for that. It's trying to teach relativity. If morality is relative, then you can do whatever you want. And critical race theory attacks traditional, rational, logical thinking. And frankly, one reason why Western thought is a philosophy of rational and logical thinking is because of the Judeo-Christian values that we subscribe to. By the way, just as an extra here, if you think, well, logic, whatever, we can get by without it. Logic is an incredibly powerful tool. Those people say, hey, trust science. Science is a process, by the way. It's not a compendium of knowledge. It's a process. So saying trusting science is like saying trust the internal combustion engine. It's a mechanism. It's a way to acquire knowledge. It is not knowledge in and of itself. But the reason why we have fluoride in our toothpaste is actually not because of scientific discovery, though it was tested by science. It was actually used, it actually came up by using logic and understanding, okay, here's something different in this area, and there's people that living the same way as these people, eating the same thing, but their teeth aren't falling out. What's going on? And they used logic to deduce, okay, there's something different here. And they found out that fluoride helps with the teeth. That's probably why a lot of us have well-functioning teeth, is because people use logic. Logic is important. Critical race theory falsely categorizes logic as white, and it needs to be gotten rid of. There's a purpose for that, by the way. If you do not have a standard of right and wrong, you can fill in whatever you want someone to think and believe. It is dangerous. Probably one of the more dangerous aspects of critical race theory. And then critical race theory is anti-family. Genesis 3:23-24 talks about a man and a woman that they'll leave their mother and father and cling to one another. The nuclear family, as some would describe it, is something that is antithetical to Marxist thinking. And again, critical race theory is Marxist. Why is the family unit contrary to this very, by the way, again, those that are standing up against critical race theory are those that understand the importance of the nuclear family. Why would a Marxist theory want to undermine the husband and wife dynamic of a family? Why would they want to do that? Because they understand that it's the great way to create dependence. If you want authority, break down connections in society. The more we break down society and that connection, and frankly, what was the first institution that got established? Someone help me. Marriage. The second one was government, but the first one was marriage. And it doesn't want to be in competition. So the 10 things here. Critical race theory as a response. It's materialistic in its foundation. It encourages blame shifting. It encourages bitterness. It encourages hate. It removes what is good from our society. It does not recognize God's image in the individual. It seeks to reinstitute segregation. It falsely categorizes logic as something that black and brown people should not be engaged in. And critical race theory is ultimately anti-family. Again, a couple Sundays ago, Roger said, why don't we do something more uplifting, tongue-in-cheek, than the book of Revelation? Oh, there we go. Is that more uplifting? Critical race theory. The point of this, there's two things. One reason why I didn't dwell more on critical race theory and its machinations is because, A, you can get that. Maybe we'll see some of that in Sunday school time and whatnot. There'll be available things that way. There is available things if you want to read and study it for yourself. But we need to see, first of all, the Bible does respond to these things. Number two, there's applications here apart from critical race theory. We can apply those. Oh, I catch myself blame shifting. I need to stop doing that. And there's applications that we have from the Scripture to our day-to-day life. A third thing why we're looking at critical race theory this period is we need to be able to speak out against it. It is something wrong. It is something legitimately evil and destructive. Again, I started off by sharing the millions of people that have died with the philosophy this is connected to. Let me share this with you. I want you to think about this for a moment. The amount of people that died underneath Hitler's rule is the same amount of people that live presently in Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. That puts a little more in perspective. If we take Germany and we take all the people that died in World War II as a result of what happened there, We take Stalin, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot. We can get rid of all the population in the United States that is outside of 100 miles of the border. So about 2/3 of the United States lives right on the border. And that's really on the outside border, not the northern border. We would depopulate every single one of those states. Bad ideas have bad consequences. Do I say there's going to be, a totalitarian dictator that's going to wipe people out? I can't tell you how far this theory will go. Can I tell you there will be riots, people burning down cities? Who would ever imagine something like that happening because of philosophies in our country? That would never happen, especially in nice, kind Minnesota. Bad ideas have bad consequences. We need to be able to speak to them from the Scripture. Let's go and close in a word of prayer.